Hello, I'm Jennifer Chenoweth. I curate programming at the Oakwood Cemetery Chapel in Austin, Texas, for the city of Austin. My staff and I map and research the lives of people buried in Austin cemeteries starting in 1839. Oakwood Cemetery was established that year, the same year that Austin was renamed Waterloo and became the capital of the Republic of Texas, and in 1846, the capital of the state of Texas. Texas was truly the Wild West then, and many of the colonial settlers came to replace the Native Americans and Tejanos who already inhabited this area. Many people died trying to fight and survive, and those people needed a place to be buried. The cemetery was on the outskirts of town then on a forested hill. Later in 1914, after all the family lots were sold out in the now 40-acre cemetery, a small mortuary chapel was built to hold funeral services on site. How we treat each other in death follows how we treat each other in life. Many of these stories are difficult and unfortunate. The chapel story has a difficult history that is still working to be resolved. I'm here to share a project called All Together Here that uses maps and data to acknowledge and address issues of racism, disregard, injustice, and seeks to find peace and healing for all. We do this through digital exhibits, often produced as story maps, and I'd like to share our most recent project with you. This is All Together Here, and it is a collection of 5 different story maps, plus 2 dashboards and a digital map. They're embedded within the stories, as well as a online symposium that we produced in October of 2020 that discussed all of this information and history and is available recorded online on Parks and Recreation's YouTube channel. And I'll show you the links of where to find all of that. I'm going to give you a little bit of context about Oakwood Cemetery that shows photos and where you can go back and watch some videos. So, Oakwood Cemetery is just adjacent to downtown Austin. You've probably, if you've been to Austin, driven by it on I-35. It's just south of Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, just south of UT's baseball stadium, is right by the Texas State Capitol and walking distance to anywhere you want to go downtown. The past shows that this was the little wooded hill that the cemetery was established on. And I'll show you where to look up some other historic maps that show where the city enveloped the cemetery over time. It was a gateway from downtown. And the chapel shown here is reticulated limestone ashlar construction. It has this beautiful new thatched roof that was put on in its restoration I think it was the roof was installed in 2018. But the chapel was boarded up and did not look like this for some time. It is now a heritage and visitor center where we teach Texas history as well as help families find their ancestors. But like I said, it was boarded up for some time. And during the building's restoration in 2016, there was a really difficult discovery. The chapel had been built within a segregated section of the cemetery. And instead of relocating graves underneath it, they built the chapel on top of graves. We did not know that when we went to restore the building. And it was a very difficult process where we worked with archaeologists, where we figured out that difficult truth and learned what to do about it with the help of our community. This is a video I hope you go back and watch, produced by Greg Farrar, who's one of my employees, and it is a descendant of someone buried at Oakwood Cemetery in the historic colored grounds. His great-great-grandfather was the first president of Samuel Houston College, which is now part of Houston-Tillotson University, Austin's historic Black university. So I really recommend you watching this amazing video about the research he's done of the people buried in the historic colored grounds. And yes, that's 19th century language. In the record books, they're listed as the colored grounds, the Negro grounds, the stranger grounds, Mexican grounds, and pauper grounds. In the summer of 2019, we did a field survey using a GPS booster to create a GIS map of all of the available and still visible headstones. There are about 300 of them. But what we discovered in the research was that they didn't even start keeping records until 1859. So there are 20 years of burials where they didn't record anything. And if there wasn't a monument, a stone monument, there's no record of that person's death or where they're buried. And then you can see here on the first page of the first ledger in 1859, here we have November 24th, a Negro child of Mr. Hutchins, aged 3 years, without a name, without a location at all. So with that, we did an audit of all the records. We haven't completed it all to be ready to be published to the public. There is a record of burials, but there are some duplicates and mistakes in it, and we're working to complete that. And we'll work to digitize that to a map of the cemetery. But what we found here, which is explained in this dashboard, is that there are 5,424 burials not in family lots. That would be in this historic colored grounds segregated section of the cemetery, as well as literally around the margins on the fence line. And it shows a timeline of when most of those burials occurred. And we compare that to the timeline of burials for all sections of Oakwood. And you can see that there's a really big difference. This number 25,000 includes several duplicates. We believe it's closer to 23,000, and we look forward to that work being done. So here is a digital map that shows how you can navigate around the cemetery now and know where you are within that 40 acres that we just produced for this exhibit. There are some lots in this oldest section of white burials here to the south, but there were no lot markers or maps made of the past of any of those burials. These small rectangles here are family lots, so those were sold as private property for a family to, over generations, bury their relatives as they died. These lots are approximately 25 feet by 30 feet and hold a number of burials. So that's how you get to the large amount of 23,000 people capacity. We've got a couple of other videos I encourage you to go watch when you have a little bit more time. And we included a photo that's at the Austin History Center of the oldest map we can find, which has a picture of this, what was then called the dead house, closer to the gates where they stored bodies before they were buried. And you can see that nothing had been mapped here, rather than a couple of stones which were there so that they could decide where to run utility lines later. But this is where the chapel sits now, and there are no marked graves where exactly the chapel is sitting. So we've included in this information that gives you a little context some historic photos, and a gallery. And this is a picture of the chapel before it was restored, before construction started in 2016. I'll move a little quickly because I want to get to the really new parts of these exhibits, but this gallery of historic photos is pretty interesting. For those of you who like maps, we included this survey of maps from the earliest ones we could find to the present, and we hope to continue to add to that as we go through historic archives. But what was really discovered in the restoration of the chapel was that as the building was built on top of graves, where those people were buried and how many of them there were, and with what disregard they were treated when they were supposed to be resting in peace. So archaeologists monitored this process. And at first there was this mechanical scraping of topsoil. There had been a plan to have a handicap parking space and sidewalk here, which was abandoned as new construction. And what the diggers do is scrape off the top few layers, and then archaeologists monitor that to try and find graves. This is where a trench had been dug to put in a sewer line, and it impacted a grave that was not buried 6 feet deep. And so the trench was moved further to the east for the sewer line so that that grave could be left in place. Archaeologists did painstaking work sorting through every bit of soil. You can see here on the grounds these kind of pink lines. That's where you called a shaft stain or a burial stain. And that is when the grave digger is digging out a hole to put a coffin. They take out dirt and then they put in the coffin and they refill it with dirt. And that shifts the color of the dirt at the topsoil level. And so that's what archaeologists are looking for to identify where graves are outside the chapel and then inside the chapel. So inside the chapel, there had in the 1940s been a concrete floor that really impacted the burials under the chapel and made the soil very dense and hard to dig and compacted for archaeologists. The outside the chapel, a few buried headstones were found. And then inside the chapel, the first few feet of soil were removed by a mechanical digger and then hand dug until the soil stains were revealed. Then, once that was found, the archaeologists, by hand, with little tiny wood hand tools, examined every single bit of information on the site. They revealed 38 burials within this footprint of the chapel. Of those, one was under the corner and a wall and could not be exhumed safely. One was exhumed and no remains were found inside of it, and 36 burials were exhumed and examined. We did outreach to the community to find out what our community members wanted to be done about this. There was not 100% consensus, but the majority consensus in the archaeologists recommended exhuming the burials and studying them through bioarchaeology analysis. So that was done. And the report was just released in May of 2020 with the bioarchaeology analysis. We had some calls from some of our city council members and community members to do DNA analysis, which is rather expensive. It's not the same process as spitting in a tube and submitting it to Ancestry when it's skeletal remains. So we've entered into a partnership with the University of Connecticut in partnership with Amatera and Dr. Maria Franklin at the University of Texas, who are donating through scientific research the DNA analysis of those remains. So what were the findings of those 36 people? Well, here they are in a 3D model of where those burials were found. And you can see some of the walls bisected the burials. So the archaeologists had to dig under walls. If they were outside of the chapel, they were not exhumed or bothered after the soil stain was found. They found personal effects inside of coffins. They found buttons, keys, ceramic ware, and all kinds of things within the graves and in the grounds around it. There's a really beautiful digital exhibit we've put together of the photos of the artifacts, which I encourage you to go back and look at some more. But the important part to acknowledge really are the people. They were examined very carefully. And to our surprise, they were not entirely of African American descent, but they were a reasonably equal mix of African American, white paupers, Mexican Americans, and that gets us up to close to 20 people. There's one person that's broadly estimated to be Asian or potentially other, and through DNA analysis, we hope to learn more. And then there were 16 individuals who were infants to toddlers who were too young to be identified. So we've got a dashboard here that examines the details about that you can read more about. And we include a map of the features of their ethnicities and ancestries best we can. Now at this time, we hope DNA analysis lets us know more. And we've also included this map of burials and pop-up information you can go see on your computer screen, and a timeline of burials. So this is really important information that we worked with our archaeologists about. And the next step are reinterment and memorials. So after the DNA analysis is done, then the next step is to rebury them. and ideally we'd rebury them and lay them to rest at peace near where they were originally buried. But we don't know if there's empty space or not. So we're going to go back and do some soil scraping at the top of the dirt just to the west of the chapel to see if there's any empty space there. And if not, we'll have to find another place within city cemeteries to rebury the people so that they can at least be all together again. We did a Q&A with Dr. Maria Franklin that describes archaeology and its purpose, especially in the rare case, it turns out, of cemetery archaeology, because most oftentimes people are, and they should be, left alone. And it shows how the materials are stored and what was done. We still have a lot to discover after the DNA process is complete. And we also look forward to hearing stakeholder feedback about what you think should be done in terms of events, burials, memorials, and headstones to bring us our community piece about this process. So that is a tour of the story map of all together here. The dashboards and the maps are also placed separately. But one of the resources I want to give you is that we did a 2-day symposium with over 40 professional speakers from all across the country. The survey to give feedback is here on this homepage, and you can get to this by oakwoodsymposium.org. It's got biographies of the amazing list of speakers if you want to go learn more about the people who did the work. And then there is the second day of our speakers included all the people interpreting that work through history, community remembrance, projects that were done in other places, and how we can best tell the story of who is buried in Oakwood. So we're really proud of the symposium and the work that we did. But of course, 2 days of nonstop online programming was a little bit much. So we were careful to record all of those sessions. And all 12 of those sessions are uploaded to the Parks and Recreation YouTube and are shared here and posted on the symposium website. And there's also a link there to get to our All Together Here digital exhibition. And with that, I really thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.